I made $250,000 from podcasting last year, and it was without a massive YouTube following, no huge email list, no viral TikToks, no dancing on TikToks, just long form conversations on my own show and as a guest. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what happened and how podcasts became the most profitable marketing channel I've ever used. Let's start with why. So for a start, my name's Freddie. I run a top 1% podcast that I started just over 2 years ago with no money, no audience, no help and no experience. And the real why is because I wanted people to know who I was. I felt like when I started my business, no one cared who I was. Now we sit in the top 1% globally. We've interviewed more than $3 billion worth of guests, and we've had such an incredible journey that we've started sharing it with people around the world. Because podcasts are the only platform where people, they give you their undivided attention for 30, 60, maybe even 90 minutes or longer, depending on your kind of show. You're in their ears while they're walking, while they're driving, while they're in the gym, whilst they're cooking. A number of ways. It's super intimate and it's long form, which means it builds that trust really fast. You're with people whilst they're doing things that they would normally do. That can't happen when they're scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, because they're sat there in another world. They're getting dopamine filled in their minds, which doesn't give the same trust and familiarity as long form podcasts do. But here's the real kicker. It's what I call borrowed trust. And I'm really big on borrowed trust because I don't think we would have got to where we are today without borrowing trust from people that already had it. And this is where people are missing out. You see, when you're a guest on a podcast, you're borrowing trust from that host. Trust that that host has built with their audience over probably years and years. Just like I have. When I first started my podcast, no one listened. Why would they listen? Maybe my mum and my dad and my brother would listen, but no one else. But over time, we've built it up. So now thousands and thousands of people listen every single week to every single episode. So we've built trust. What that means is that when someone comes on and they're invited onto our podcast, they've got the borrowed trust that I'm lending from my audience onto them. I'm saying to my audience, this person is trustworthy. We've done our research on them. You should just trust them. And so when you're showing up with authority, not as much as a stranger, but someone who's endorsed, that's what really changes the game. And that's what changed the game for me. You see, people came into your world already warmed up, already sold on your values, already thinking, damn, I need to work with this person. And now let me break that down the way that I actually did it and how we managed to do the $250,000 purely through the podcast channel. That's not including aggregate revenue. That's just one marketing channel that you can do as well. So I run my own show. Like I said, it's in the top 1% globally. What that effectively means is you get a certain number of downloads and you've got a certain audience number, and you have a cadence, and you probably have a quality score in there as well. If you look at Raphonic or Listen Notes or a number of platforms, they'll help you understand what's in a top 1% show, top 5% or top 0% like Joe Rogan and those kind of podcasts. But the truth is, the real revenue spike came from when I started to guest. Because obviously one of the best ways to grow a podcast is to go on other podcasts, just like the best way to grow a business is to go on podcasts in general. Because you can't market a podcast in the normal way. You can't put ad spend behind it. You know, I didn't have any money for ad spend anyway, but you can't do that because no one just sees a podcast and goes, I'll listen to that person. And so that revenue spike came from the guesting because I committed to going on 2 podcasts a month. When I say 2 podcasts, it's really 2 hours. So it could be 1 long podcast, could be 4 short podcasts. I always wanted to cover 2 hours as a guest, either online or in person if I could do it. If there was an in-person podcast, I would always choose that over the online one, just because the quality of the visuals are probably going to be higher and they've probably put more investment into it, which means hopefully the quality of the host and the audience is better. But when I get there, I don't just wing it. I researched the shows, I tailored my pitch, I made sure that every episode was aligned with what I offer, but also was aligned with what the audience was looking for. So if I'm going to give away something to that audience, as an example, I wouldn't just give the same thing away to every single audience. If I was going on a fitness podcast, a business podcast, a food podcast, I'd make sure it was hyper aligned. And so let me give you the full system. So you guest on high quality, niche, relevant shows. You show up really prepared with stories, epiphanies, and lead magnets in your back pocket. The epiphany is the thing that people are going to walk away with, and I keep talking about it. It's like the soundbite. So it's the way of explaining something without just explaining something. You've got to make sure that in psychology, we go almost blind to the mannerisms in how someone speaks. But if there are hooks, if you like that example, if there are hooks in there, which we would call epiphanies in the audio space, you're going to pay attention to that, maybe rewind, and that's the part you're going to share with everyone. And the lead magnets, like I said, so that we can actually capture some of this audience intention. Then what you can do is you can then take those clips and repurpose the episodes across your LinkedIn, your email, and your Instagram. And that will obviously help with your own audience. But the real power is making sure that there's a clear path back to me. So there has to be a free download. There has to be a call to book a link to book a call. And there has to be some way or some reason to follow you. Most podcast hosts are going to say, how can they find you? You need one clear thing they can do. Really simple. It's not always easy, but it works. And if you're looking at finding something that's going to work from 2025 for the next 10 years, I think you've got three things. Paid ads will still be there, but they're getting more expensive. AI, obviously AI we use across our entire business. We've got ahead of AI. But the main one for marketing is going to be long form content. And long form content in the shape of borrowed trust through the podcast network and associated media is already working, and we're barely even leaning into it. So let's talk about numbers, because if you're watching this video, you really want to know how to get to that $250,000. And I must just say, we've helped over 100 other entrepreneurs, founders, and experts use this exact system, and they've almost all had a very similar, if not better, result than we had. Bearing in mind, we came from a standing start. So in the last 6 months, for example, I've been on 12 podcasts. The episodes have driven hundreds of leads, which have turned into tens of thousands of dollars in closed deals. And if you look at how that breaks down, roughly 60% of those leads come direct from shows that I've been on. They listen to me on a podcast, they follow me, or they would download a lead magnet directly from the show. Both of those we would attribute to podcast guesting. 30% come from my own podcast. So people that are listening week in, week out. We're adding followers all the time through Apple, YouTube Music, Spotify, YouTube itself, and a number of other ways. And so from our own show, they could download lead magnets, or we get a lot through DMs, referrals, or our own newsletter growth. And the remaining 10%, I'd put that down to repurposed clips that went viral or brought in new traffic on platforms that we're not as prevalent on. Like YouTube at the moment, to be honest, or TikTok, maybe places like Pinterest, or just when you repost stuff and people share them. That I would attribute to repurposed content. But I've only had to go on 1 or 2 podcasts per month to get 60%, or maybe even 70% if you add that 10% in of that revenue. And no, I'm not selling a mass market course. These are high ticket sales that we're selling, that $250,000 is made up by. It's not $10 courses or little lead magnets. Lead magnets are always free. On this channel, I've got a 2-hour tutorial which tells you exactly how to do every single step of being a top podcast guest. But in this video, I want to break down how we've used the entire system with a podcast, repurposed, and guesting. So it's high ticket. It's building high authority trust at scale. And so it doesn't take hundreds of clients. It just takes the right ones, a few good ones. And if you're wondering, could you do this? Could you add $250,000 to your business? The answer is 100% yes, but only if you stop treating podcasting like a hobby or a PR stunt or something that you think is a bit fun to stroke your ego. That's where everyone who comes to us goes wrong. Everyone I speak to who's got a podcast, and we mention what we do and they go, oh, I've got a podcast. It doesn't work because you're missing out on the whole thing, which is that you're literally creating media to then drive people into your business. I know people that have been on podcasts, spoken really well, used some of those clips with paid spend behind them on Meta ads and made hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not organic, that's paid, but it's still high authority content, which you couldn't really make anywhere else. And in this age where we're testing organic content, as soon as it goes viral, we put some paid ad spend behind it. Podcast clips are still the ones that go the furthest. And so this is what I think makes the difference in this system. I've built, for example, a repeatable pitch system. So I know how I'm going to pitch what I do and my beliefs and my thoughts and my insights dependent on which kind of podcast I go on and the conversation that I'm in. But I'm always able to circle back to the story arc that I want to tell, which is that podcasting is the way to grow your business and that we should be looking for effectively a life of freedom. I like the idea of simple growth systems, being a quiet founder, not having to show off, not having to park that Lambo at the front of the house, being able to go without fame, but with authority. I created a killer one-pager to be able to get onto podcasts because obviously you've got to show your demonstrate your credibility, show why they should have you on. And also I would normally say, give them an angle. A lot of podcast hosts will look at you and the first thing they're going to do is go, what angle can I talk about to this guest? And if you give them that straight up, you've done half the work for them. The other part is designing a lead magnet funnel that is built for long-form listeners. So these long-form listeners are not looking for a quick win. They're looking for something that can help them over time. And I studied really how to speak in sound bites and not waffle. So I'm a big advocate for speaking exactly how you speak. So if you speak quickly, if you speak with a certain accent, if you have a speech impediment, don't worry, that's absolutely fine. Don't listen to these coaches who say you need to slow down and speak more clearly, because I think whilst you do need to be understandable, you need to also be you. And part of this system is that I could bump into someone in the street and they say, oh, I was listening to you the other day. I actually had someone last week who they heard me ordering some food in a restaurant and asked if I was who they thought I was because of my voice. And that's a relatively small podcast in the grand scheme of things, right? I'm not a famous person, but I've got enough authority in certain areas that people would hear my voice and know who I am. And I'm not speaking in a certain way. Imagine if I had taken a speaking coach's advice and I had spoken really slowly and put on a very posh British accent. Then in real life, you wouldn't know who I was. It's not the same person. You wouldn't have that trust. In fact, you would break the trust because you know that I've put something on to deceive you. So speaking in sound bites is super powerful. And the result, people message me saying, I heard you on this podcast, or I know I needed to work with you because of this. And that doesn't happen from cold emails or 30-second reels. Most people think they need to go viral to grow, but virality fades, trust compounds. And podcasting, whether you host or you guest, I would suggest you do both, but the cheapest way to do it is just to guest, is the fastest way that I've found to borrow trust, build authority, and bank revenue. Now, in my old job that I left the corporate rat race from, I used to work at a company, we did about $4 billion a year. It's the world's largest digital publisher. We had 200 plus websites, did 500 million monthly visits to those websites every month, and we made over $300,000 per day profit. And in that company, we learned a lot about this, a lot about storytelling, a lot about trust building, a lot about familiarity. And it works so well for experts and it works so well for entrepreneurs because most people are trying to deceive. And we've all been burnt by programs, services, products where you thought it was one thing and another thing happens. And you just roll over and go, yeah, it wasn't the greatest program, it wasn't the greatest product, but it's okay, I've tested it and I've not gone bankrupt because of it. Well, that's not good enough. In this day and age and going forward, we need to have proper trust where we say something that we're going to solve, we solve it to a high standard. And that's exactly the same as on podcasts. We need to turn up, we need to provide value and insight, help someone understand they've got a problem, bring them into our ecosystem so that we can then solve that problem, and then that becomes a referral network for you. There's so much value if you just understand the concept of borrowing trust. And this is another thing to add to this. Most people show up to podcasts unprepared, right? They talk in circles. They don't have a lead mag, they don't repurpose the content, they don't help the host to propose and to promote their own show, and they wonder why it didn't work for them. They wonder why it didn't convert. Well, podcasting can be your biggest driver of leads and clients. It's something that I wholeheartedly believe in if you treat it like a system. And most people just treat it like a hobby. So that, if you follow what I just said there, that will add $250,000 to your business next year. It is not difficult. It is a simple system of long form, high authority, borrowed trust. And you can do this just like we have.